You got it?
Yes.
Hey everybody, welcome to Tuesdays in the Shop. Surprise, it's me in front of the camera this week instead of Andrea. I'm Ivete, if you haven't met me. Oh, I touched my mic. That's Andrea's signature move. I am often behind the camera and Andrea is in front of the camera, as you know if you've been joining us every week. But this week, the theme of the video is Yvette's favorite tips and tools for free motion quilting. I'm the quilter around here, Andrea's more the piecer, and honestly, quilting is what got me into the quilting hobby. I kind of hate that the word quilting means both making a quilt and also quilting the quilt, but that's neither here nor there. My favorite part of the process is the quilting, and it's because of this idea that you already have a design, right? You've pieced it, maybe you have flowers, maybe you have stars, and now you're gonna accentuate that by adding a whole new layer of design on top of that piecing. There's kind of nothing else that I can think of that is the equivalent of that. Like, I knew how to knit before I learned how to quilt, and like, you could maybe say that quilting is similar to finishing for knitting, right? Like, you have to sew the front of the sweater to the back of the sweater, but there's very little creative part to that, right? Like, you might have a button placket that's decorative or something that you put on at the end, but mostly it's about function. It's so that the front of the sweater is attached to the back of the sweater. And yes, quilting is also about function, right? If we don't quilt our quilts, the three layers aren't gonna stay together and it won't wear very well. So absolutely, function is a thing. But if we only cared about function, we wouldn't worry about design. And I think most of us worry about design when it comes to quilting, right? My very first tip I have for you is, I hear this all the time in my classes. People say, I'm afraid to ruin my quilt with the quilting. So you did all that work to make your quilt top. Probably you're making it for a gift. You want to do a good job. You want to be proud of the finished project. And you end up with a top and just like complete paralysis. And the phrasing I hear the most is, I don't want to ruin it. And I'm here to tell you right now, I have never once seen a quilt ruined by the quilting, except for one time. The very only time that I can think of is somebody I know sent her quilt off to be long-armed, and the quilt was really cute. It had all these cowboys on it. It was like bandanas and horses and cowboys, and all like red, white, and blue, super Americana. And it came back quilted with like purple thread. There was no purple on this quilt at all. And she ended up ripping it all out and doing it all over again. And I get it. Like, in that case, the quilting stuck out so much and was so wrong. That one really got ruined by the quilting. But that's the exception to the rule. I mean, how many hundreds of quilts, thousands of quilts have I seen over the years? We've been in business 8 years. I was already quilting before that. I've never seen a quilt ruined by the quilting, except for that example. And let's be honest, none of us are going to put purple quilting thread on an Americana cowboy quilt, right? So let yourself off the hook with this idea that you might ruin it with your quilting. You will not ruin it. It's going to look great. And resist the urge to, when someone tells you that quilt came out great, resist the urge to point at the little mistake and be like, no, 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 look right here. We all do it. Just resist that urge. Did you ever hear that saying, like, if you can't see it from the back of a galloping horse, it doesn't count? Keep that in mind. So that's my number one tip. Do not be so critical. Do not worry about ruining your quilt. For today's demo, how much can you see of the Q16 that we're demoing on?
A little bit.
A little bit? So maybe I'm going to move the camera a tiny bit just so you can see more of it.
Yeah, there you go.
Ooh, here's our favorite new baby, favorite new store sample. And the reason I'm demoing on this machine is, one, it's new and it's very cool. And two, it is very similar to your home machine. It might not look it because it's gigantic, right? But the way this part works is exactly the same as on your home machine. And these tips are all meant for your home machine when you're doing free motion quilting. So don't worry about the fact that my machine is really big. It's exactly the same as yours at home. We're going to drive with our hands just like you would.
Ready to drive?
Oh yeah, let's switch cameras. So here comes tip number 2. Ready? Do you see how my quilt sandwich is all nice and flat? How did I make this happen? Sorry?
Yes.
Oh, good. Thank you. Andrea is confirming that you can see that. Nice and flat, right? Here's the secret. This is how I made this happen. Spray adhesive, my favorite thing. You can, of course, baste your quilt with safety pins, right? We have those curved safety pins that you go in and you put them in. You can, of course, also thread baste the way people used to for years and years and maybe centuries even before we had all the nice things that we do nowadays. However, the best result for your basting comes from spray basting the way I did. And the reason for that is because when you pin baste or you thread baste, you're really only basting every so often, right? The attached part is the part where you pin through or you sew through. When you're doing glue basting, you see how when I pull, it's all stuck? The entire surface of the fabric is stuck. And that gives you this nice, smooth layer. Also, bonus, you don't have to pull your pins out as you go or cut your thread as you go. So it also saves you on a lot of time. Why am I talking so much about basting? This is a step that happens before you even sit down at your machine. But if you don't do a great job basting, or at least a good enough job, let's be honest, right? Who wants to baste? That's not our favorite part. You are going to have a much harder time doing your free motion. You're going to end up with more gathers, more puckers, more weirdness. So take the extra time, baste really well. If you're using pins, paste with more pins. Don't be stingy on your pins, because the more pins you put in, the more connected the 3 layers are and the easier your time is going to be when you actually start quilting. So that was tip number 2. Tip number 1 is don't worry about ruining it. Tip number 2 is basting is the secret to really good quilting. The next thing I want to talk about is the different feet that you have available for your quilting machine. So the generic term for the kind of foot you want to use is a darning foot. So this one is the number 9 foot. Can you see that better with my hand or without my hand? Or neither?
It was fine, and now it's blurry. That's okay.
Because I probably moved. Better?
Blurry.
Less blurry?
Less blurry. Yeah.
So this is your standard Bernina darning foot. The one you have at home, if you don't have a Bernina, might look slightly different than this. They come with a plastic bottom. Some of them have an open bottom instead of a full circle like this. Any of those feet count as a darning foot, and any of them are acceptable. I personally don't see much difference between the different feet, but some people really prefer, for example, a clear base. So here's a clear base one from Bernina. This is the Bernina number 29 foot. And you can see why someone might prefer this one, right? Instead of having part of your design blocked off by the metal, just like in this one, you can really see everything. So pretend you're trying to align something to something else, or pretend you want the repeat to look the same. This is easier to see through, so some people might prefer this foot over this foot, right? Another option is a foot. Oh, did I grab the wrong foot?
Which one you want?
I wanted the kind with the open front, and I grabbed 2 of the same foot. Look at that. I meant to grab the one with the open metal part, which is another way that you can see. We'll skip right along on that one. Another kind of foot that you might need or want to add to your arsenal is a ruler foot. A ruler foot and a regular darning foot look pretty similar, except for the ruler foot has a much higher side on it. You see that? Thank you. So the reason we have that wall there is because it's what's going to align to your ruler. So you have your ruler, you have your foot, and the ruler is going to run past, well, the foot runs past the ruler's side, right? If you try to do ruler work with a regular darning foot, you run the risk of accidentally having the foot go over the ruler, and then your needle might stitch into the ruler, and then you throw out your timing, and then it's a whole big costly repair. You don't want that. So anytime you're doing ruler work, you absolutely need a ruler foot. They're not the cheapest feet, but they are very, very necessary for ruler work. Believe me, do not try this at home without a ruler foot. Andrea went and found me the foot that I should have brought over. So this is the standard number 9 metal darning foot, and this is the one with the open ring. You see how it's metal again? This is the number 24 on the right, and this is the number 9 on the left. Pretty much the exact same foot, except the front is open. So gives you a little bit more visibility. And also sometimes your thread might get stuck on this ring on the inside, like coming over or coming under. And this way, with an open toe, you can't get stuck. Again, from my personal preference, it doesn't really matter. If I sit down on a machine and it's got this on it, I'm gonna work with it. If it has this on it, I'm gonna work with it. But, you know, it's an option. It's good to try them if you have access to different ones. You might find that it makes all the difference for you. And also, by the way, while I have these in front of you, little tip on the Bernina feet, the distance between the needle and the edge of the foot is 1/8 of an inch on these, okay? So if you line up the edge of this foot or the edge of this foot, you're quilting at 1/8 of an inch distance. The other interesting foot that I brought over is a clear bottom. This they refer to as an echo quilting or a couching foot. This is the number 44C, and you can see that it has a nice clear bottom, so you can really see what you're doing. How this is an echo foot is that you can align to the outside, you can align into this inner mark down here, or you can, oh, it's really hard to see?
It's hard to see those markings. Oh, that's better.
This is better? Okay.
Yeah.
So you see how you can align to the outside edge, you can align to this inner edge, you can even align to this edge over here. So there's 3 different spots that you can align to when you're doing echo quilting. And if you don't know the term echo quilting, it just means quilting around the thing and maybe quilting around it again, as in echoing the shape of the thing. I like this foot also because can you see that it's a little bit curved? So that means most of us are not quilting into a big empty expanse like my sandwich right here, right? We're quilting onto piecing because we've pieced a quilt top. That means it's not entirely flat. What's nice about this curved edge is that if you end up having not the most flat, it kind of just skims right over it. So that's a nice feature of this foot as well. So this is one of my favorites also. Depending on what brand machine you have, every machine brand does offer a darning foot of some kind. They just don't all look the same. If you have an older machine and you cannot find a darning foot for your model, look for a third-party darning foot. There are companies that make nothing but specialty feet that are backwards compatible with a low shank machine, a high shank machine, whatever you happen to have at home.
So are all of these feet the same ones that would go on a regular Bernina, say a 325 or a 475?
That's such a good question. Yep. All of these feet are standard Bernina feet. That's one of the things that's really cool about the Q16 for us Bernina owners. Every foot you have actually fits the Q16 also. So you can see that on these feet, they have a very funny top, and that's just because they are the darning feet. But if I show you this one, this top looks more like what you're used to for a regular Bernina foot, where it has this like solid front. And most of these feet are also available for legacy machines. So if you have a Bernina that's mechanical only, say from the 80s, you just look for this foot, but with the word legacy on it. The current feet are called new style feet, which is kind of a silly name. The old style feet are alternatively either called old style feet or legacy feet, or sometimes people even say red feet because the boxes used to be red for that style. And all of these are available as a legacy style. They just might look slightly different. Like, for example, this one in the legacy, this part looks different, but this part looks exactly the same. The important part. Was that a person's question or was that just your question, Andrea? Thank you for reminding me.
Sure.
Yeah, that was a great idea to remind me. All right, so on this machine, I'm just going to start stitching a little bit just so I can show you tip number 3. You already maybe know this tip. Whenever you're doing free motion, you always want to pick up your, what is the word I'm looking for? Bobbin thread, right? The bobbin thread, this is your top thread. The bobbin thread is the thread that's under here. If you were sewing in a straight line at home with your feed dogs engaged, like if you were piecing, you would be going a straight line like this, right? So these tails would be way back there by the time you were done. They're never going to get in your way. When you're doing free motion, you're going to go in whatever direction you want to go in. And what does that mean? That means that this tail that's hiding down here that you can't see, I guarantee you will be quilted into the back of your quilt, and then later you're going to have to pick it out and then bury it at the end So how do you avoid that? You avoid it by picking up your bobbin thread at the beginning and at the end. Every time you start, every time you stop. A couple ways you can do that on your machine. Every machine will work by using the hand wheel is the word I'm looking for.
The video's frozen.
The video froze?
Yeah. Technical difficulties.
Let's troubleshoot real quick.
I tried switching views, but that didn't help.
It could be that our internet's not so great at the edge here.
We're doing just fine until just now.
Let me check.
Sorry for the delay, everybody. We're working on this technical difficulty. I mean, I can switch to the other view. Technical.
Yeah, it's still streaming, so your video's frozen, but it's actually working.
Oh, okay.
All right, so sorry about that, everybody. Hopefully your screen comes back soon. I forgot what I was saying.
But isn't it streaming what is on the screen?
Interesting question.
Technical. That's what I see. Difficulty. So it's not. Okay, so we'll
Just a
switch to
question.
Technical. That's what I see. Difficulty.
Try switching cameras.
It did.
Okay, and
The other one works.
the other camera works?
Yes.
Try switching cameras. Okay, and the other camera works?
Oh, that might have done it.
Try switching cameras.
I think it did it. I think that did it.
The other camera works?
Oh, that might have done it.
Try switching cameras.
I think it did it. Yeah, that worked. That did it. Yep. I can see it.
You can.
Yeah.
Hey! All right, quick tech lesson. Ready? I unplugged the camera that was giving us trouble, and I plugged it back in, and it was
Can
fine.
you turn it off and turn it back on again?
I don't know if you know this, but my background is software development, and this is the trick. Until you've unplugged it and plugged it back in again, don't worry, it's not actually broken yet. All right.
Just have t-shirts printed.
Oh yeah, we should do like a quilting version of.
Have you turned it off and turned it back on again yet?
Have you checked your bobbin, or
Rethreaded yet?
All right, so what I was talking about before the technical difficulties is that you always need to pick up your bobbin thread, right? So when you start and when you end, you're going to, first thing you do is pick up your bobbin thread. One way to do that is with the hand wheel. By turning on the side of your machine, I'm going to turn it so that the needle goes into my, oh, and by the way, the foot should be up. Turn so that the needle goes into the machine, comes back out of the machine, and then I'm still holding my top thread. And you see that now it's basically down there. Here's my bobbin thread. It just popped up. Can you see that? Now I have two strands of thread up here. This is my bobbin thread and this is my top thread. That's one way to do it. You can never go wrong with the hand wheel. Every machine has a hand wheel, so you don't have to worry if you learn how to do this with a hand wheel, no matter what machine you sit down on. Maybe you're taking a class, maybe you're at a retreat and you sit down at somebody else's machine, you'll know how to do it. I'm pulling it out so I can do it again. First step is you hold the top thread. Second step, you put the needle in, take the needle out, and then when you keep turning and pulling, sometimes it's a little more stubborn, so that time I had to move a little bit more, but here's my bobbin thread. And I'm just gonna pull it all the way through. And before I start stitching, I'm going to put it somewhere that isn't gonna get in the way for whatever design I'm about to do. I'm gonna do it one more time. This time I'm gonna do it with my foot pedal. So one of my favorite features on certain Bernina models is that you can put the needle down and or cut the bobbin thread or put your presser foot up with what's called the back kick. It's the back half of your presser foot. And on this machine, I currently have it programmed for when I press that spot, it's going to put the needle in, take the needle out. You wanna watch the magic? Again, I have to hold my top thread. Nothing's gonna work if you don't hold your top thread, okay? I'm gonna press the back of the foot pedal. Whoops, I let go of my top thread. I caught it though, you see? So it went in, came right back out, And here's my bobbin thread. The beauty of doing it with automatic setting like this is that the machine always stops exactly where it's supposed to. When you're doing it with the hand wheel on the side, you sometimes don't complete the revolution correctly, and then you might end up with the needle slightly down or slightly up, and sometimes you lose your top thread. Sometimes you get no stitch when you start stitching. Yeah, so if you have a needle up down button, use that. It's much easier that way. All right, I'm going to just put my needle back in now. See, and I'm all ready to stitch. For the purposes of this video, it's not really about the designs, it's about the setup and the things that make your free motion adventure, let's call it, easier. But I know everyone comes here to actually watch a little free motion quilting, so I feel like I should probably give you some of what you're looking for. So on this machine, right now I'm sewing in Bsr 1 mode, which is a mode that speeds up and slows down according to how fast I'm stitching. Can you see these two red lines? I mean, red dots?
What are those red dots?
These are the Bsr sensors. So that's a Bsr and that's a Bsr. They're built into this machine. So when you're using the Bernina stitch regulator, and you happen to be using a white fabric with a white batting and a backing, you might end up seeing that light. See the little light? That's how you know it's working. I'm going to turn manual mode on now. So without the Bsr, you see how there's no light now? That's because now I have to regulate my stitch length, and as you can see, I did a real bad job in that 2-minute segment. I'm going to turn my Bsr back on, and maybe, you know what? Oh, so could you hear the difference there? I outran my Bsr. That means I moved so fast that the Bsr couldn't keep up with me.
Do all machines have a Bsr?
No, and not all of them are even compatible with the Bsr. So if it's something, oh, I mean, that makes sense, isn't it? One of the things that I always have people try is to spell their names. Because if you don't really have an idea of what to do, when you sit down, you kind of just like blank. So you can always spell your name. In terms of compatibility, the Bernina Bsr is compatible with a lot of the machines that have a computer in them, but not all of them. So you do have to look it up. If you have a mechanical only machine, there's no such thing as a Bsr for that, because it is essentially a little computer. And some models actually ship with the Bsr. So like the machine, the sewing machine that I use at home is the 570, and that ships with a Bsr included. So that's a nice option if you are going to be doing free motion.
The back of your machine too, and if there's a little jack.
That's a good point. Yep. So Andrea's saying that on the back of the machine is where the Bsr plugs in, and if you have that little jack, it means that it does work on your machine. You can also send us an email and we'll look it up for you if you want. I got out of order now with all my ideas and all my commentary. Oh, I remember. So I showed you how to pull up your bobbin thread at the beginning. Now I'm going to show you how to do it at the end. It is way more confusing at the end because where's my top thread? I can't grip my top thread, right? So what's the first step we're going to do? The first step we're going to do is we're going to pick up, well, actually, very first step, because my needle's in, I'm going to pick up my needle because I did not want to deal with the needle being in. And now I'm going to pick up my presser foot. See how it's raised? The first thing you're going to do once those are up, you're going to move your quilt. And why do we do this? It's so that we expose our top thread. Why do I want to expose my top thread? So I can grip it, because that is step one of pulling up your bobbin thread, right? So you're going to move the quilt, hold your top thread, and then put the quilt back where it was. And now the process is exactly the same as it was at the beginning. You're going to put the needle in, take the needle out, and then you'll see the bobbin thread pick up. So on this machine, I'm going to press the back kick again. That puts the needle in, takes the needle out, and you see my bobbin thread came right up, right away. No problem. Now, when you do it at the end, you end up with kind of a mess of thread. And at this point, it can be very confusing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull a lot more bobbin thread just so you can see what I have here. You see it? And then I essentially just, what I teach people to do is just cut through these three. So in this case, I'm going to use my thread cutter right there. So now I have a little bit of extra thread, but in general, I like my tails to be pretty big because I'm going to bury my ends. And if you've ever tried to bury your ends with a tail that's like an inch long, you know how miserable that is. So I tend to go for big, long tails that I then just sit on the couch and bury while I watch TV. And so, okay, so tip, I don't even remember what tip number I'm on. Let's pretend that I was more organized than I was and that we all know what tip number I'm on. Here's another tool that I like to use. These are called Quilting Gloves. We carry the Machingers brand. The package looks somewhat like this, Machingers. And by the way, when they get old, they get real gross looking. You think that your quilt is clean? It is not clean, especially if you live in New York City. Yeah, wash your hands. So the way these work is, and you can see I've used these a lot, right? So this part of the finger is a grippy, rubbery texture. This part is exactly like, you know those gloves you use to like moisturize your hands? That's what this feels like. Or like a lightweight gardening glove. But then this part is grippy and rubbery. When you wear these, what it does is it helps you with your grip. So anytime I'm doing sit down free motion quilting, I do prefer to wear these because I have a little bit more control. They're not the prettiest thing in the world, but they...
You're not gonna win any fashion show.
Yeah, no fashion shows. Well, some kind of weird fashion show maybe, but yeah, so I like this and it just gives you a little bit more grip when you are quilting, right? And this brings me to my last free motion quilting tip, which is in almost every class that I'm in, there's somebody who has a really hard time moving her fabric around. And what I want to show you, even without my gloves on, if I just use one finger, I can move my fabric. The fabric is not stuck, right? So you can imagine that if you're using the entire palm of your hand and you're having a really hard time doing this, there must be something wrong. The thing that is always wrong in these situations is that the person is so nervous about having a grip on their quilt that they push way, way, way down, really, really, really hard. And when you do that, you're creating so much friction between your quilt and the table that it becomes very difficult to move your fabric back and forth because you're pushing down so hard. So what I always say is don't do a death grip. You know, you're not trying to like win a contest for your hand strength. You don't need to press down very hard. Watch one finger. One finger moves my quilt around, right? So do a little suspension of disbelief that you don't need to shove down super, super hard and just try it. Very light, like I'm just gonna do it with my tips of my fingers so you can see. Trust me, you can move the fabric without pressing down super hard. You will also be less tired if you don't press down super hard. In in-person classes, back when I did this class in person, I used to put my hands on people's projects and then have them put their hands on top of mine so I could feel the pressure that they were using and I could tell them, you know, ease up or don't ease up. I would say like 80% of the time if somebody's having a lot of trouble moving their fabric around, it's because they're pressing down too hard. And that seems like such a simple tip, but makes a big difference. And I wanted to just show a little bit of free motion, sorry, not free motion, ruler work. Oh wait, I skipped a step. So the other thing I wanted to talk about is marking utensils. So I really like a chalk. I don't actually have a chalk pencil with me because I couldn't find one today when I was getting ready, but a chalk pencil is probably my number one option for marking. And to be fair, my number one option is to not mark anything because marking takes time and I'm always on a deadline. So I try to skip that step whenever possible. But when I do mark, I tend to use a chalk pencil the most. Second most popular is this water-soluble blue pen. It's nice because you just spritz it with water and the line goes away. No matter which pen you're using or pencil, always, always, always test it. You should really test on every quilt because all your quilts are made with the same fabrics, right? So it's possible that even between the same manufacturer could have used two different chemicals on two different classes of quilt, of collections of quilting fabric. And for all you know, collection A has a kind of chemical on it that will really react with this pen. And it's never happened before, but on this collection it might happen. and you already did all that work on that top. You don't want to ruin it, right? So just test it on a little corner in case it doesn't come out. You're not out your whole quilt. The other tip related to this pen, because this is a water soluble marking pen, if you live somewhere where it's insanely humid, like Florida, don't mark your whole quilt all at once, because the humidity in the air will make this mark go away. So like imagine you spent like 2 hours marking a quilt and then there's a thunderstorm, you might come back and have all your marks gone. So just mark a small amount, quilt that part, mark another small amount, quilt that part. I think that's a pretty amusing difference, because like if you live in Arizona, you never have to worry about that, right? But if you live somewhere like New York City that is really, really humid, this is a problem with this pen. Speaking of problem pens, I am not the quilt police type person. I teach in a way where it's like, here's how I do it, give it a try, see what works for you. This is one of the hard and fast rules. You do not use a friction pen to mark your top lines, your quilting lines. The reason for this is, and if you're not familiar with this pen, this is actually a really cool pen. The term is heat erasable. So basically you mark, then you use a iron, and then the mark doesn't actually technically disappear, it just becomes transparent. The line is still technically there. All fine and good for marking internal lines in your quilt, not good for marking visible top lines like quilting lines, because as I mentioned, the line doesn't disappear, it just becomes transparent. What does that mean? It means that should the line come back in the future, and this can happen especially if the quilt gets really cold, the line comes back. I heard somebody sent a quilt to a very competitive quilt show, and it flew under the plane like packages do, and when it landed, all those marks were back. Like, you do not want that. Just don't use this pen. I like this pen, but for marking internal marks, like last week when we did the half square triangle video, marking an internal line like that diagonal that you're then going to cut, perfect use for this pen, not a quilting marking pen. So the last thing I wanted to show is a little bit of ruler work, because I feel like most people are very impressed and or scared of ruler work, and it really isn't that bad. You just have to go slow and you have to be patient with yourself. Do not be so critical. Don't expect to be perfect in 5 minutes, and also don't start on a real project. Start on a practice project like this. Here's the ruler foot again. Remember, it has this high side that we're going to align our ruler against, and that's the point of a ruler foot. So this is the 72 ruler foot. It actually is really cool because it's adjustable. See how this little spin here? I'm turning it, and what's happening is the space here is shrinking. The reason this is cool is because sometimes you might be using high loft batting and your quilt sandwich might be much taller, and sometimes you might be doing something very thin, so you can adjust the height of the bottom of the presser foot to be right where you need it, instead of a little too high or a little too low. To be honest, I've never actually adjusted it on a real project, but it is cool that it exists. So like on this one, I could probably adjust it down a little bit. You see how this has like a big gap there? So I'm gonna adjust it just because I have the ability to, so why wouldn't I, right? So I'm gonna press pick up again. All right, and tip number, whatever number I'm on, when you first go to buy a ruler for free motion ruler work, start with a straight ruler. I know it's boring, I get it. No one wants to start with the straight. However, you are going to use this ruler all the time. I guarantee you, if you get into ruler work, if this isn't the first ruler you buy, it'll be the second ruler you buy. Because if you're going to stitch in the ditch your block, which you might want to, depending on what kind of quilt you're doing, you're going to use this to ditch, because you can't ditch freehand. Well, I mean, I guess you could, it just wouldn't be very straight. And the angles, this particular foot is a Angela Walters foot. I don't know if you can see that on there. She calls it the slim. And what's cool about this is that it has a straight on either side, right? And then it has the markings so that you can do a line, move the ruler, a line, move the ruler. These are 1/4 inches apart. So if you wanted 1/2 inch lines, if you want 1/4 inch lines, it also has markings this way, so you can align depending on what you're doing. And then it has the bonus of a rounded edge at the top, which you can use for some more interesting designs. Like if you did this a couple of times, it would look like, I don't know, like tabs sort of. You could do just half of it and then repeat that. It's kind of cool. I like Angela's rulers a lot because can you see that there's grippy parts on the back? They're made by Creative Grids, which is this really high quality ruler company. And they're nice 1/4 inch thick acrylic. It's not going to break. And it's also going to fit the side of your ruler really nicely. Sorry, what did you say?
I thought, but it doesn't help.
Yeah, so my first tip for ruler work, start with a straight ruler. When you're doing ruler work, it's exactly like how you start for regular free motion. The first thing we're going to do, again, is pick up our bobbin thread. And because I have this cool machine with a back kick, I'm going to hold my top thread, put the needle in, take the needle out, and pick up my bobbin thread. And I just realized there's all this mess over here. I'm actually going to do this again somewhere else because I have all this space. Why am I going to crowd myself, right? So let me do it again. I'm holding my top thread, put the needle in, take the needle out, pull. Here comes my bobbin thread. Now both of my tails are up top, and now I can start sewing. Now, for ruler work in particular, some machines can put the foot down when you start sewing. This is one of them. You don't want to do that on ruler work. You're trying to be precise, right? Like why else would we be ripping up or pulling up rulers? We want things to be exactly right. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put my presser foot down so that I can line up exactly where I want. If you want to check the position of your needle, you can use your hand wheel and put the needle down and then align it exactly where you want it to live. Pretend there's a block here and you want that needle to go into the corner of where the block starts. That's a good way to check where your needle is. Some machines also have what's known as a Needlepoint Laser. This machine has that option, but we didn't actually install it on this one. And that would show a red dot exactly where the needle's going to go down. But in any case, I'm going to then put my needle in. I always like to stop and start for free motion with my needle starting down. So that's the needle down setting on your machine. The reason I like this is because it kind of locks the work in. When you start and when you stop is when you're the most likely to make a little jerky motion, and then you get a bad stitch because you moved a little too much or a little too fast, right? If your needle's starting at the bottom in the work and ending at the bottom in the work, even if you accidentally do this, nothing's going to happen because the needle's in, and it's kind of like training wheels in a way, kind of keeps you from yourself. This is the most common thing that happens at the beginning and at the end. Oh, what tip am I on now? That's got to be like 16 or something, right? I'm just going to show you a little bit of stitching with a ruler, because the most complicated part of picturing how this works is like, what do your hands do, right? So before, when we were just quilting free motion, I was trying to get as much surface area as possible covered with the palms of my hands. The same thing is true with ruler work, except that some of your hand has to be on the ruler. Now, if you're a right-handed person, you probably are doing what I'm doing here, which is that the ruler's in your left hand and your right hand is more in control of things. If you're left-handed, you probably would switch. However, do what feels normal to you. I guarantee you one of these will feel more normal, whatever it takes. I'm gonna just stitch right along the edge. And in particular, that thing I explained before where people death grip and pushing in happens even more when you're doing ruler work, because you're so nervous about the ruler shifting or the fabric shifting that people tend to push really hard, really, really hard. If you do this and like your fingertips start turning white, you're doing it too hard. And why is that bad is if you do it so hard, the needle, you're gonna start breaking your thread, you might break your needle. Well, yeah, you're definitely going to wear yourself out for sure. So I just did, can you see the line that I did there? I just went straight down. It's actually my least favorite direction to quilt in because I'm looking straight this way and I actually can't see this line at all. So I generally try not to quilt straight down. If anything, I'll quilt in the other direction. I'm just gonna go across a little bit. So I'm gonna do the exact same thing, but back. When I do this, I can actually see what I'm doing, right? So it's a lot easier to kind of make decisions about where to go next. If you quilt, when you're doing vertical lines, I like to go from the bottom to the top. Now, let's be honest, I'm not gonna cut my thread, come back to the bottom and do it again, right? If I was gonna do parallel lines like this, what would I do next? I would go to the side again, stop, move my needle, sorry, not needle, ruler, and then go back down. And if you're using a ruler like this that has marks, you can actually use the ruler to figure out your spacing. So let's see, was that pretty good? No, I didn't go quite far enough. So I'm gonna go a little further. Yeah, that looks pretty good. And I'm gonna go back. Now, you may be wondering, how come I went this way without turning the ruler? Because I was being lazy. There's a whole like, do what I say, not what I do kind of concept here, right? So if you're gonna go across, you can either line your ruler behind your needle or you can align it in front of your needle. What you do really depends on what you're trying to see. In general, I like to align behind, but it does make it a little funny to try to hold onto your ruler. So I tend to do this kind of thing where the bottom of my palm is on the fabric and the fingertips are on the ruler. And then I'm just gonna go across. I'm gonna kind of guess that this is aligned. Oh, it's not. Gonna go back. Well, I think that went too far. See what I'm saying about jerking at the beginning and the end? There we go. And maybe I want to go this way now. That looks pretty good. I mean,
Looks straight.
Oh yeah, that's why you do a ruler, right? To get a straight line. Especially straight in the diagonal direction is really hard to do freehand. And again, this is an empty space, right? In real life, we don't quilt into empty spaces like this. This is just for demo purposes and just for learning purposes. In real life, there would be a block here. There would be piecing to align to. There would be different colors, right? You would have some kind of visual hint about what direction to go in and how to design your quilting. So this makes no sense really what I just did, but it was just because I wanted to go in a diagonal next. So one more time, I'm going to show you how to pick up your bobbin thread at the end. Pretend I was finished quilting, right? The first thing we're going to do is we're going to pick up the presser foot and we're going to pick up the needle because I can't do anything till the needle comes up, right? Pick up the needle. So when you're doing the end, the very first step is move your quilt to expose your top thread. You're going to grip your top thread and put the quilt back where it was, right? Or roughly back where it was. Now we're going to do the same step we did from the beginning. We're going to hold our top thread, which is what my left hand is doing right now. I'm going to put the needle in, take the needle out, and then here comes my bobbin thread. And this one is the confusing one where you end up with like a, I don't know, Medusa of thread, and you're going to cut through these 3 strands at the front. And that's the end of it. That's how you pick up your bobbin thread. Does anyone have any specific questions that they want me to cover related to free motion quilting?
Can you talk about different sizes of rulers?
Sizes of rulers?
Sandra Mullings is asking.
Um,
Should I get some of the other shapes?
So yeah, there's definitely different shapes. In terms of size, my hands are very small. So I like smaller rulers. So this one is about, I think, 2 inches wide. I own a bigger straight ruler and I don't like it because it's too wide and it's hard to control. Realistically, you're never going to do, 2 feet worth of straight line at once. You're going to do a tiny bit, readjust, a tiny bit, readjust, because it's just too hard to grip, right? So I say size smaller is better because you're going to be more accurate and it's either easier to control. However, shape, there's all kinds of rulers. So this one is also an Angela Walters one. Do you think this is better from this camera or the other camera?
Switch to the
Okay. So this ruler is called the Squiggy. It's another Angela Walters ruler. What I like about this one is you see how it has these ends that are kind of like stop gaps or something. I don't know what the right terminology is for that. What's nice about that is you can align them exactly where you need it and then do your design and then stop exactly where you want and not accidentally go off the edge of the ruler if it didn't have that. And look, if you turn it upside down, it doesn't really seem like it would be a different design, but it totally is. And when you buy one of her rulers, she has all these videos that go with them. So on the back, there's a QR code and you just scan it and that gives you access to videos that show you how to use it. And she also has these design ideas.
A little closer to the camera.
Can you see all the different design ideas that she's already put in? So these are just like, you know, the basics that this ruler can do. You could do so many more things if you just played with it. So this is the Squiggy, and yes, we do stock all of these rulers. The next one is the Archie. This is one of the tiny ones. So we were talking about little rulers. So this one is very small. You can see the size of my hand, right? What I like about this one is that it really fits in sashing, which is a use case that a lot of us are trying to quilt into sashing on a block quilt, and it's kind of hard to know what to do with sashing. It just kind of stares at you and is like, here's my empty space. So she has a couple of different ideas of what to do in strips and also how to use this as an all over. So this is a fun one. I don't find that I use this one quite as much as the Squiggle. And this one is one of the more interesting ones. This is called the Chevy, or maybe Chevy. I never know how to pronounce things. I'm gonna blame being foreign, even though I speak very good English. What's really cool about this ruler is that it was originally designed as a stitch in the ditch ruler. So can you see that it has a right angle on the outside? The idea here is that you would align this to this block that you're going to ditch, and you would just align it once and then ditch all the way around all in one go. Realistically, this is very hard to do all in one go. You at very least are going to stop at the corner. But it's really cool that you can theoretically align it once and quilt all the way around. And then on the other side of this ruler, it has this fun shape that can do all kinds of interesting things when you repeat it in different ways. So whether you turn it 30 degrees or you put one on top of the other, or you space it like 10 inches or 10, I don't even know where I was going with that. And as you can see, this ruler also has marking lines. So you can align every repeat exactly the same amount away. I like this one.
So these rulers don't come in different thicknesses, only different shapes.
Oh, was thickness the question? So in terms of thickness, the kinds of rulers that you quilt with are different than the kinds of rulers that you cut with. A quilting ruler is generally a 1/4 inch thick, and a cutting ruler is generally 1/8 of an inch thick. And the reason for that is basically because acrylic is really expensive. So they make the cutting ones be thinner. They probably would make them even thinner if they could. But 1/8 of an inch is high enough that we can align our cutting rotary cutters against the edge, right? With quilting rulers, if they were 1/8 of an inch, the likelihood of you accidentally stitching on top of them would grow a lot. So that's why they're 1/4 inch high, so that it makes it a lot harder to stitch onto them. And then the side of the ruler foot, which you probably can't see this, that I'm holding it to there, the wall of the ruler foot is the same height as the wall of or the height of the actual ruler.
So anytime you're using a ruler, doing ruler work, you want to make sure you have a ruler work foot with a high collar.
Right, which is what this foot is. So the reason a ruler work foot exists is so that it can align to your ruler. And then your foot goes along the ruler.
Yeah, don't use your number 9.
Yeah, do not use your number 9. All right, any other questions that came up? No? All right, well, if you think of something I haven't covered, feel free to leave a question in the comments or send us an email. I'm happy to help. This is my favorite topic, so I'm happy to talk about it anytime. Also, if you want to join one of my classes in the future, I don't have any on the calendar right now, but I am working on getting some dates on. I teach an Intro to Free Motion Quilting class online. And then I'm also going to start doing a class called How Should I Quilt It?, which is about the design part of the quilting. I've taught it in the past. It's always a ton of fun. And the more people who sign up, the more fun it is, because we take submissions of finished quilts to design quilting for from all the students. If you aren't on our email list yet, that's the best way to find out when we have new classes released. Go to our website, scroll all the way down, and you can sign up for the newsletter right on the footer. The website's gothamquilts.com. And yeah, that's it for this week. Next week, we have a whole new topic for you, which I blanked on as soon as I started explaining this. Oh, it's Stampandria. That's what I was going to say. So next week's video for Tuesdays in the Shop, we're doing another round of Stump Andrea. What does that mean? It means that now is your chance to submit fabric that you want us to consider using for next week's video. How do you do that? You go to our website, and it's /StumpAndrea, and you can just upload your image right there. Any fabric that you're having trouble pairing with other fabrics, maybe you bought it on a vacation somewhere and it's a completely different style than what you normally sew with.
Or someone gave it to you.
Maybe you inherited it from somebody. Maybe you picked it up at the share table at the guild and it's got a special meaning because it was from that guild meeting, but you have no idea how to use it. Those are the perfect options. The goal is to find a fabric that Andrea cannot put together into a bundle. Can you do it? Can you stump Andrea? Let's see. I'm going to put the link in on the video as well, and I hope to get some submissions. The more submissions, the more fun this is. And if you could get them to us by like Friday, that would be excellent. If you can't, that's fine too. But we're looking forward to seeing your stumpers, and maybe you'll be the winner of whatever prize we come up with if you actually stump Andrea. Thanks for joining us again. It's been fun, and we'll see you next week. Have a good night.
I clicked up here. Oh, this one.